And welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us again for our fifth segment of Ireland's Future in Conversation with, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome our very first political leader in conversation. Previously, we've had three former political leaders and a professor from Queen's University in Belfast. And we are very, very excited and thankful to introduce our next guest, who is our political leader of the SDLP, newly elected political leader of the SDLP, and she is MP in Westminster for South Belfast and Down. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome the SDLP's Clare Hanna.
Hi there, glad to join you.
Clare, thank you so much for doing this, especially on a Westminster Day here on a Tuesday, on none other than April Fool's Day. So whenever I got the reply, I wasn't sure if Siobhan was serious or not. So thanks a million for doing this.
I feel like I should have thought of a good gag there, but any faux pas or anything I accidentally say wrong, I'm just going to pretend it was an elaborate April Fool's Day hoax.
I know. But listen, we obviously had Colin Eastwood, and we'll go straight into it because I don't want to keep you too long because I know you're very, very busy. We had Colin on. He was actually our second guest on for the diaspora here abroad, particularly in the United Arab Emirates. But moving into your new role as leader of the SDLP, I'll open up with a question about you. So the question would be leadership and vision for the SDLP. And as the new leader of the SDLP, what's your core vision for the party? And how do you plan to reconnect with voters all across all communities?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it seems to me that the SDLP's kind of core values and mission is as relevant and vibrant as it ever was, but we've had a tough decade or so, 10 elections in 10 years, and I guess we've been a bit buttressed about by events, by things like Brexit and by assembly collapses, and we haven't been as clear about who we are as an anti-sectarian centre-left New Ireland party, and I suppose that's at the core of it. Our mission was always around kind of peace, the north-south dimension, and I suppose power sharing. And I guess it's just a refreshed version of that. The peace is now about reconciliation. The north-south dimension is now about the active pathway to New Ireland, and the power sharing aim is now about actually delivering good government and meaningful change for people, which has been a bit absent in the post Good Friday days. So it's that stuff, and then the unglamorous business of political organisation and just having us fighting fit in constituencies to I suppose gain a few more seats and get more SDLP people elected to councils, to the Assembly, to Westminster, and underpinning all that, convening and driving forward the conversation about a New Ireland.
New Ireland seems to be a very, very hot topic, none more so considering we do have a presidential election in the south coming up, which it has its own conversational direction. But when we go back into politics in Northern Ireland, it's very evident to see that there's a huge stronghold on female presence. More so, I would probably say, than ever. Now, as a man from Derry, I grew up in the north of Ireland. I do class myself as an Irish citizen, born in the north. And when I grew up in my 80s and 90s, there was obviously leaders like John Hume, Gerry Adams, Martin McGuinness. The DUP had all the lads. It was a very male-orientated place with maybe one or two female figures who were playing that iron hand. Obviously with Michelle, Emma, the Alliance, yourself, where's the ladies and the females of Northern Irish politics now you seem to be taking over?
Well, I suppose we're dressing a balance rather than taking over, but you're right. It is an era of, I suppose, female leadership and a wider understanding, not just in the island of Ireland, just about that leadership means a lot more than just kind of middle-aged dude in a suit, that I think a wider understanding of the different skills and attributes it takes to I suppose, do public service and facilitate conversation and get things done. And I suppose you see some of the most standout leaders around the world are women, and it's about as well all elected chambers just having a duty to reflect the population that they serve. And for years, you're right, it was all the lads, and some of those iconic images and positive, lovely images that from our region and from the likes of the Good Friday Agreement. While it's great to see them, they're jarring, not just for things like yellow shirts and stuff like that, but for the lack of women in them, and it's amazing how much we have come on now. I mean, as anybody who was around in those days, that there were certainly women around in politics, women around in making change, and I was a bit spoilt in that. The SDLPs always had a decent presence. I mean, our general secretary, the kind of effectively chief executive of the party, all through the late 80s, 90s and 2000s was a woman called Jerry Cosgrove. My own mum, now, she was an activist too. She didn't run until kind of the late 90s, whenever I was coming 18, but she was a councillor and MLA. And funny, just last week I at an event celebrating the pretty iconic Breed Rogers, who was there. And in fact, my favourite image from the Good Friday days was a silhouette of a big hug of her and Seamus Mallon hugging in the window. And just, it was the moment the media shot it through. It was the moment that, they knew that there was a breakthrough. So I suppose that that female energy was always there, but not always in front of the camera. And I think it's a positive thing that we're more reflective now.
Brilliant. And you just gave me, and I remember Mary Bradley in Derry as well too, being such a vital member of the SDLP growing up.
Yeah, and you'll know Pat Hume, of course. I mean, she was the intrinsic other half of John, as he said. He was the parcel, but she delivered him, and she was not alone. And that's why the Hume Foundation have called themselves the Pat and John Hume Foundation, recognizing that she wasn't, just his wife, wasn't just his, I suppose, running the constituency office. She was his closest political advisor, and he never made a big decision without running it past Pat Hume. So really, as I say, that was always core to the SDLP's decision making.
So the reason we have you on today is to really, really get grasp and a hold of this whole conversation that is no stranger to people who have interest. But it's relatively new to those who are obviously just hearing about it. It's always probably been on a lot of people's lips, and that's constitutional change, the idea of a referendum in Ireland, a united Ireland, new Ireland, whatever you want to call it, phrase it, word it, whatever it might be. There's a lot of great institutions back in the north, obviously SDLPs, is it the Irish Commission?
Yeah, Commission. Yeah.
The new Commission, and then I know Sinn Féin have theirs. Ireland's Future is also running very, very great documents as well too, with Colin Harvey. But when it comes to constitutional change in Irish unity evolving throughout the north and the south, what about us? What about us here as the Irish Diaspora Board? Where do you see the SDLP's role being played in having the Irish diaspora included in that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, it is something that's kind of deepening and properly getting into more detail. No doubt, the dynamism in the conversation is post-Brexit, and also, it has to be said, Billy, post the kind of skins that Northern Ireland, the North, hit during the latest government collapse. And I think that sense of nothing working and people really seeing the limitations of the political system we were living within has just injected a lot of momentum into the conversation. And a lot of it is, you're right, that different parties, and it's important that lots of parallel spaces and places to talk about it exist. I mean, the Shared Island Forum is another one as well, that it's a body of the Irish government, and it's a practical output in terms of capital investment and so on. Some of that pretty big stuff on stuff that creates north-south synergies, but also they funded a lot of dialogue events that are more about, I suppose, reconciliation and sharing rather than specifically constitutional change. The diaspora, though, you're right, it's a freshness that mightn't always be present. I work in London a couple of days a week, so I do a fair amount of contact with the Irish in Britain, the organisation, and then just the wider Irish diaspora here, and I am genuinely refreshed by just the maturity and the different perspective on dual identity. The fact that people equally and comfortably carry their Irishness and their Britishness, or their Irishness and whatever other wherever else they are living, and lots of people who are overseas and have maybe adopted some of the culture of where they're living, but hold their Irishness in the same place. And I think in terms of reconciliation and bringing people along, particularly that Irish in Britain, that being British or Irish or both as they so choose, to quote the Good Friday Agreement, and to do it in a very unself-conscious way. There's a lot that those of us who want to further this can learn, from that. Ireland as a whole has been an exercise in fairly good practice in terms of accommodating change and diversity over the last couple of decades. And I mean stuff like social movements, equal marriage, abortion rights, all of that coming from the ground up, but also the fact that 1 person in 5 is not from the island of Ireland anymore, and we've kind of expanded the definition of Irish in a civic way, in a really, really inclusive way. And I suppose the big challenge is accommodating Britishness within that, and the up to 1 million people who legitimately and genuinely identify as British, and making them part of, making them feel part of a new Ireland. And I suppose some of that is about making sure that we shake off. There have been, for understandable reasons, there have been parts of Irish nationalism who've maybe identified themselves as not British, because of the history of the traditions on our island, and the tradition of our island and the one next door. But it will be time to move on from that as we write the next chapter. So as I say, diaspora who are used to holding those two identities and those two ideas in their minds, in their new lives around the world, I think will be a really fascinating and positive contribution to the debate. So I suppose some of it is about finding the places for them to fit in. You'll know the SDLP column had been calling for, I'm continuing that, for the re-establishment of the New Ireland Forum, which you'll know was a kind of an early 80s Irish government initiative, and it put a lot of credible, authoritative research and facts into the public domain. So it wasn't so much of this university saying this, and this researcher saying that, and this campaign group is saying the other. It was about coherent data and analysis about, for example, joining public services together. And we think that's the next logical step, and that will create other forums and other opportunities for people to feed in.
So staying on the diaspora side of it, though, I think the latest stats was 1.7 million people are actual citizens of Ireland, live outside the island of Ireland, which is either a quarter or just under a quarter of the actual population of the country. 1.7 million.
And is that passport holders, Billy, as opposed to just people who have a lineage? Is that what you mean by actual Irish citizens?
Yeah, well, they're passport holders, registered citizens abroad.
Yeah.
They're not just the 70 million that they throw out on St. Patrick's Day who say, "Oh, they're all Irish." This is actually
very welcome to be, but yes, I know what you mean. Yeah.
This is to get really underneath when it comes to a referendum constitutional change voting point. These 1.7 million people who live outside the island of Ireland, what is their role? Because look, we can't vote. We haven't got anything close to that yet. We have a presidential election coming up in November, which is completely overlooked by the government in the south for everybody abroad and north of the border. What is our role we could talk about it all day until we turn blue in the face, and we can send money home to commissions all over the world, and we can invite people for conversations online. What's the diaspora's actual role here?
And please keep doing all those things, by the way. Yeah, you're right. I mean, in terms of who has the franchise when the referendums come, and we might come back to the fact that we're not at the place yet for them to come. And actually, and I know you're not, but talking just about the referendums and the moment and the mechanism is probably not where the focus needs to be. But yeah, I mean, even as you'll be aware, and it's not brilliant in the north either, but accessing your vote is even more challenging in the Republic in terms of absentee voting and all of that, let alone making provision for people who are away but who retain a strong connection to home. My sister's in the States 30 years. She's home a couple of times a year. She's very much, with her kids, she's very much, still of the island, of the family. But you're right, there isn't, and sometimes people are, neither sheep nor goat, because she hasn't wanted to take citizenship in the US. She wanted to retain her Irish passport. So I suppose it is about, it is the ways that you were talking about, convening the conversation, learning. Just as I say, we're trying to create genuinely, we're building something new, modern, pluralist new nation, and it's about taking the best of what works in other places, in the spirit of not just kind of grafting two parts of the island together. So there isn't at the moment, I mean, as we've said, there isn't a defined role for anyone other than that ultimate moment when the referendums are set. It's about creating the structures where everybody feels that they can chip in, where whatever ideas, big and small, people have, they feel that they've got somewhere to put them. They've got somewhere to talk about, hopes and fears. And that's what our commission has been doing fairly quietly in its first few years. It's about kind of eyeballing people and saying, like, well, what bits excite you, what bits frighten you, and just trying to understand what's in people's hearts when they're, the good and the bad, whenever they're thinking about this. And yeah, we'll be just designing ways that everybody with a stake in this feels that they can contribute and be part of it.
Moving into the economics of it all, right? Yeah. So where do you see the economics of Ireland's future lie, if or should it come to an opportunity? Now, in the UAE here, we have a very strong hold on tech, finance, healthcare, and education. Yeah. Things that you'd probably fight for every day. Yeah. In Westminster for the North. Where does all of that stuff come into when it comes into discussions around unity?
Well, first of all, as you noted, we're speaking on the 1st of April, the day before what the new occupant of the White House is called Liberation Day, and the day before we don't really know what's coming our way in terms of tariffs, which may or may not have a short or long-term impact on the Irish economy in particular. But speaking as we are at this moment, it's one of the main, I think, incentives and I suppose drivers of interest in this discussion is the open, dynamic, connected economy of the Republic, and how jealously many Northerners of all different backgrounds look on, at uncomplicated access to the EU, and just an ambition that just leaves Northern Ireland Assembly, even when it's at its best, just leaves it completely in the dust in terms of grabbing all the opportunities available, which is what Ireland has successfully done, internationally for a long time. And obviously, we can talk and we will differ about how those economic gains have been directed and spent at home, and the continuing problems within the economy, but that level of access and openness and opportunity is one of the real drivers. And we're also speaking in the week where the UK's welfare reforms are and very dismal spring statement are topical, and I suppose just that sense of a stagnant economy, that sense particularly for the North, just a staleness, a poor labour market relative to others in terms of careers and exciting jobs and meaningful work. So I suppose that is a lot of people just think partition and the economy that we have as a little part of the UK getting our pocket money every year just isn't fulfilling the hopes and dreams and the potential of people of our region. So that's the economic context. There's always a danger that those of us who are for unity fall into some of the Brexit traps and be totally Panglossian about it and go, so that's why, Billy, everyone will be loaded and the sun will always shine and we'll all be gorgeous and all of this, that we can't be too kind of, isn't it magical? But I mean, goodness me, exactly those opportunities. And as I say, even at the baseline, the fact that we have kind of instant re-access to the European Union without the navigating through all the post-Brexit, guff around that. So, I mean, if you look at, as I say, you were speaking to Colin Eastwood in a previous edition. Colin and I were just chatting about the impact of some of the new UK measures on his constituency, and if you look at it in particular and its lack of access and connections to the rest of the economy, and you compare it with other places in the northwest, it's very that's where you can most starkly feel the pain and the holdback of partition in your hometown. So those are the opportunities to I suppose rise all the boats in places along the border that have been cut off from hinterland. But it's just wider connecting into that, and I suppose it's the mindset shift. Now that's not to say I'm not letting respectfully, I'm not letting the Northern Ireland Executive off the hook in creating and seizing what's available to us right now. And fundamentally, the SDLP has always been a party about people's needs and opportunities in the here and now. We fundamentally believe that a new Ireland, as I say, that economic opportunity, that confident place on the world stage, that celebration of kind of diversity of people and arts and culture and all of that. We believe that's the best configuration, but we also believe there's a lot that the executive can be doing with the here and now that they're not doing, that they're not opportunity they're not seizing, not least with dual market access and stuff like that. But that's the case for it. And in terms of what exactly it looks like, how quickly we can realize some of those opportunities, how we can, leverage investment, all of that, that's what's up for grabs. That's what we co-design. That's why we want things like the New Ireland Forum to help shape that and prepare for that, and kind of help, I suppose, devise a strategy that means that we're going into this both with our eyes open, but with our kind of arms open as well to grasp what's available, and why it's important to make it a positive prospect that people want to get in on and want to invest in, and I think that's really, really possible. And I think as the debate becomes more textured, we'll see the bad bits as well, and there will be, because Northern Ireland's kind of lank economy has created real problems, real just underinvestment, underconnectedness, and as I say, under ambition, and it is going to take a lot of investment and animation to address that.
I loved your Westminster pocket money line. That was great. And
yeah, that's ultimately what it is. I mean, as it happens, it's kind of whatever else, and the Labour government aren't making everybody's dream come true, but they have injected more money into public services, the budget, and that includes a bigger block grant than we've seen possibly ever. But we don't have now. There are financial levers that the executive are failing to use, but that's kind of what it is. We're an add-on. We're not fundamentally in control of our own destiny, and if and when the executive step up and make good economic decisions, they don't actually, and maybe this is a reason why they don't, but they don't actually realize the gains. If they did manage to pull it off and just inject that bit of energy into the economy, they don't get the tax take anyway. The check just comes the same as it ever did from London.
So now that we're kind of talking on that, the pocket money scene, we're trying to look for a referendum and a constitutional change. We're looking at the South. Small FYI on these conversations, we have been unable to entice any Southern TD member of government, anybody in the South to come talk to us. It's everybody who's from the North has agreed, including yourself as our first actual political leader, which we're very, very thankful for, to get a really good insight into it. Now, as you said, Westminster are failing to inject money into the North. Why would the South absorb that? So when it comes to what makes Dublin say, well, you know what, let's have a talk about a new Ireland or unified Ireland, but why would we take the North?
So just to clarify, I mean, it's not enough, and it's not enough to correct decades of underfunding. It's not that, I mean, we actually do get a fair bit more per head than the average person in Britain. It's just that the UK government, the UK's economy is very, very weak, and that in general there hasn't been enough to go around, because it's a very unequal economy as well, and a lot of it's kind of hoarded at the top. My point is actually that we're not doing the things we should be doing with it in the North. But you are right to identify, and we need to be, as I say, open and honest in this conversation. You'll know that the SDLP produced a kind of a 6 principles document about how we will go through this conversation, and one of them was honesty, hope with honesty, because there's no point, as I say, in kind of just saying it's all going to be perfect. We'll work out the detail at the other side. But you're right to identify that people are in different places, North and South. I think it's really, really important that we're open about that. I said we're married to a Dub, but I know my in-laws and our family they're thinking about this in a very different way than the people I meet every day and my friends and family in Belfast and beyond. That's just a reality, because we're the ones who are hoping for something else. I think that we know that there's high rhetorical empathy for the North and high instinctive interest in the creation of a new Ireland, but it does, the numbers start to deteriorate a little bit when you start talking Turkey and you start talking dates and times, and there's no point in pretending otherwise, because it will mean change, it will mean upheaval, it will mean there will be costs to it. Like I say, we genuinely believe that you can make more of it, and we think that as I say, removal of the border ultimately in that crude way will create positive and virtuous circles for all of the border regions and economic opportunity. But at the moment, we do have to acknowledge that there is a substantial subvention to the North that does come from London, as is normal, by the way. In nearly every country, the capital subsidises regions, but it's particularly acute for us. But we do have to acknowledge that subvention, and that's not going to be magicked away just on a wave of hope and excitement. And that's the type of detail that properly needs to be looked into, because people will want a decent economic prospectus. They will want to know the basics of who's funding public services. They'll want to know, how the pension's going to be paid and all of that. And people in the Republic will want to know what the cost will be. And look, if you look at any referendum that's hit the Southern electorate, if you look at the two that just about this time last year, family and care, and they did not go the way people thought. It's a dynamic stroke volatile electorate who will have their say, and we just don't know exactly what way this debate will go, which is why people saying let's have the referendum and let's talk about the referendum and what date's the referendum are missing the point and not getting into the detail. But that's why it is, and there is, and we will be continuing to make this case. There is a duty on the government to start stepping towards that in a formalised way and helping to answer some of those questions.
Yeah, I just think it's very interesting. As you say, people from the North, right down through Cavan and Monaghan, seem to be very, very supportive and pushing. We from the South, especially from a diaspora point, we've yet to feel that warmth in conversation. I mean, Leo Varadkar came over here and had a few conversations, but but that was it. That was it. It's gone, and we've
again. Politicians are their first duty is to their constituents in the right now, and there's a bazillion things you need to be doing, and it's some of the same challenge about why aren't we properly planning for a changed climate, for example, and the energy transition, because politicians are dealing with the, oh my goodness, what's burning right now, and what are people asking me right now, and need to think a lot longer term. But this is kind of the same thing. Their electorate will be saying to them, same way as my electorate are saying to me, yeah, I want a lot of them, not all of them, and I readily acknowledge that. There's a lot of people who are interested in it as a concept, and that's what we need to tease out. But people, the first thing they're saying is, schools, hospitals, roads, and all of those things have to be addressed as well. That's why you create space for it, Billy. That's why a forum, so that every conversation doesn't go, what would this mean in New Ireland? But you create times and places and resources to have that conversation.
Going back up north again then, Claire, we do have a lot of people from the north of Ireland over this side of the world here in the UAE. And I said to Colin and everybody else beforehand, we've yet to see a minister visit or a political icon or a political person visit the country to address those from the north, not necessarily on constitutional change, may it be on constitutional change or referendum, but just concerns in the north of Ireland where people may want to go home, but they want to have their questions answered, and in particularly in education and healthcare. What do you say as the leader of the SDLP to all those people from the north who watch this on this side? What do you say to them on that? Is there any question we can maybe?
You mean in terms of politicians go and have that conversation in Dubai?
Well, yeah, because a lot of political leaders would travel all the world. We had St. Patrick's Day where you guys have a lot of people in Ireland, and we do believe that there is maybe a ministerial visit from the south coming in a couple of months' time, maybe in 2-3. But we've yet to have anybody from the north engage with those.
We're in opposition and a small party with a small team and small resources, so we don't do a lot. I mean, I guess some of it is using the opportunities of technology to engage, and we'll always do that. As you know, I mean, I suppose with the ministerial roster, they've both got to get bang for their buck, but I can imagine if a politician went over, there'd be a tabloid with a front page about a jolly and a junket and all of that. So I have some sympathy, even leaving aside the carbon dimension for whoever would be pilloried for going over for a chat. But I mean, and I suppose some of it is about the combination of government and diplomacy and trade, and that going where there are economic links. But it is about using, as I say, networks like yours that exist to kind of say, the channels are open, and we want to hear from you, and we want to, and as I say, that's why we were very happy to take the invitation. I can only really speak for the SDLP, and we'll take that out. But mostly, alas, on things like Zoom, we haven't the budget for the for coming in person. But it is important to that the kind of the flock around the world are kept in contact. People want to keep their connections, and for very many people, they want to ultimately they imagine returning to Ireland, and that's something that people should be facilitated in doing, going away, seeing the world, broadening your horizons, in many cases, building a good career, but ultimately, people in many cases want to be.
Yeah, that's the thing. We see a lot of stuff in the news lines making the headlines about inviting back. We want to make a country where you're invited back to bring your skills. We have to watch it on news 4 hours ahead. So sometimes we miss that opportunity. But Claire, look, I'll go into one more question, but I just want to say, by the way, Matthew O'Toole's a very good opposition.
He's fantastic. Yeah, he is currently leading a much smaller, much quieter opposition. He had a new baby last week, so he's off for taking some time for a couple of weeks. But I mean, he is genuinely creating a new culture of accountability that has been absent for the assembly, and I think it's really, really good for politics that role is there and that somebody of his caliber is in it.
Yeah, it's fresh. It's not mundane. It's not what you would always be.
Yeah.
Watch, which would make you want to turn the news off.
Yeah.
Is interesting to watch. But as you are now leader of the SDLP, and you obviously now will carry a legacy for a very, very long time. What do you hope your leadership will bring, not only to SDLP, but to Irish politics as a whole? And how do you want to be remembered within all that?
Well, geez, I'm not even 6 months in, so I think it's probably a bit early for me to get too highfalutin on legacy. As I say, I'm a lot of politics. It's about vision, but it's about organisation as well. And for the SDLP, it's about, I suppose, restoring our self-confidence. We legitimately have spent a lot. I mean, this is before the agreement and since, we focus a lot on kind of solving political problems and thinking through those, and probably less, as people say in therapy, less time on ourselves, you know. And we have neglected our structures. We've neglected maybe defining our own identity, and that's allowed other people to kind of cast negative aspersions on us. So it's, I suppose, giving the SDLP back that sense of purpose, that sense of self-confidence, and that sense of, and I think you know, what people when they think of the SDLP, they think of Hume, they think of Mallon, but I think those people having a plan. I think they knew people had the trust and confidence in those men because they maybe didn't know every twist and turn of what meeting they were in or the legislation or what, but they were able to have confidence that they were taking them somewhere good, and that they had the right values, that they were genuinely, I mean, and a lot of, it's a kind of an under discussed part of the new Ireland. It is going to be about what are the values of this new nation that we're trying to create. And I think the SDLPs, as I say, of tackling things like inequality, tackling sectarianism, because sectarianism isn't going to just go away like magic through through the mechanism of a border poll, and I think that sort of pluralism that is associated with the SDLP, I just want to, I suppose, reinsert those values back into particularly Northern Irish politics, but politics as a whole.
Lovely. Well, Clare, thank you so much for taking the time out to speak to the Irish abroad. I know we kind of caught you off guard, but as a 50-year entity here and for the Irish abroad, I'd like to say a massive thank you and Gormina Mayogut. And congratulations on speaking Irish in Westminster. You've got some great reviews on that.
Brilliant. Well, listen, love the chat and stay in touch. And as I say, it is a good reminder for us to make sure that these conversations aren't just for, you know, whoever can rock up to the local community hall to hear them, you know, about people being able to tap in wherever they are.
Clare, thanks a million, and I hope to catch up soon.
Yeah, dead on. Stay in touch. Thanks a million, Billy. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, Clare.
Bye.